It can feel very unnerving and draining even when someone is fixated on you, perhaps very intensely, and their attention is unwanted. And you see this a lot with narcissists. When narcissists at some point felt like they had control over somebody, but then they lose their grips on that person. And they never really got to use the person in exactly the way they wanted. They never really got to see the story play out the way they wanted. And the person kind of moved on, has been let loose, and God forbid, even doing well. For the narcissist, it's a recipe for their possessiveness type thinking, their obsessive thinking on people when they feel like they have control or almost had control over somebody. They felt like they could use that person as a puppet for the long run. But in the midst of their games and manipulations, the person kind of escaped, moved on. And then the narcissist can't see it play out the way they want. That's the type of circumstance that can get the narcissist fixated on the person, because essentially what the narcissist is trying to do is they want to bring the person back in somehow so they can rewrite history so that next time the history, their story, ends in a way that they want, that suits their personal narrative and ego. And that's where you find that sometimes you detach from the narcissist or from somebody who's very manipulative and toxic. You can detach for weeks or months or even longer. And when you kind of pay attention to them or you hear people talk about them, you realize that they haven't moved on from you. They covertly or even overtly try to draw you in, all with an attempt to stroke their ego and get you in a position where they can get that leverage over you again and let things play out in a way that suits them the next time around. And the thing with that distinguishes narcissistic people from normal people, healthy-minded people, is healthy-minded people accept when you part ways. Healthy-minded people don't try to keep a hook in you just so they can beat you. But that's what narcissists do, because narcissists, they do not know how to let go. Of course, people always say, oh, the narcissist isn't thinking about you, they've moved on, the narcissist is with their new supply. Some narcissists will even say, I never think about my former supply once I'm with my new one. And you hear all kinds of stuff. So sometimes people have mixed ideas about what's really going on. Not to delve too much into all of that, but the long and the short of it is, if they've broken you down, if they've used you in the way they wanted, if they've gotten to see their story follow through and you played the part they wanted, yeah, of course, you've done your duties. They don't need you anymore. At least not for a very, very long time, sometimes years even, where you've kind of completely moved on and you're a new person, because time does change us. But it takes a long time in that situation for the narcissist to kind of start thinking about you very intensely again. What I'm talking about is slightly different to all that. What I'm talking about is a situation where the narcissist never really got to play the story out with you the way they envisaged. You never really reached the crux of making them feel good about themselves, validating them, stroking their ego. And then in midst of their games, you moved on. They underestimated your independence, your strength, and everything else about you. And now they don't really have you anymore. And now they don't know how to use you in their story to play out the ending that they so badly need. That's the situation where they fixate on you. That's the situation where they sometimes develop an unhealthy obsession on the person. Especially if deep down they realize that maybe they could have done something different to have kept you longer, but they overplay their card, as they always do. And then they can't simply reel you back in. But what you find is, you, in this case, the target, it can be really exhausting when you reach that point where you absolutely realize the toxicity of the narcissist, when you absolutely realize how messed up they are. I mean, narcissists are messed up because when you give them sufficient time and space, they really tell on themselves. You can't unsee it once you've seen it. That's the problem. And that's what narcissists hate, because they try to rewrite history and rewrite your perception, but you can't unsee it once you've seen it. You've seen the darkness that resides within. You even see you see the trauma that they suffered that gave rise to their narcissism, for example. You see that they don't have a healthy fiber in their being. You see how they can be completely one person today, a completely different person tomorrow, a completely different person 2 or 3 days later. They go from being like a psychopathic serial killer type mind to being Mother Teresa to being just a normal person. And they keep contradicting themselves. And for them, that contradiction and so on, and being one person today and another person tomorrow, it's just like so normal. This intense dissonance that would be for most people, for them, it's just normal. It's because they are dissonant, because they only create facades. And they're driven by intense feelings of insecurity, vengeance, anger. They make big decisions off the back of these types of intense feelings. And you see the dissonance of who they are and what they say they are, and what they portray themselves to be, and the complete mismatch between words and actions. So once you've noticed all of that, of course you can never go back to them, and of course you can never take them seriously again. Even if they've turned into like a permanent Mother Teresa, you're not going to take them seriously again. But what you find is they nevertheless keep themselves fixated on you, and they keep themselves thinking, how can I rewrite history with this person? And that's unnerving because it's unwanted attention. You don't want their energy. And to be fair, like, even though a lot of narcissists, not all narcissists are sociopathically or psychopathically inclined to the point where they can go out and do heinous crimes, but at the same time, I will never put it past them, because when they feel enough hurt, when they feel enough being in this self-victimized mode, they always think, everything they do to other people to hurt them, they somehow think in their mind the other people are doing it to them. Like, they can act off the back of these delusional feelings and interpretations of reality. And that's exactly why I'll never put anything past them. Even if I think that some of them don't really have it in them to do that, I wouldn't put it past them. And of course, many narcissists do have an overlay with sociopathy and psychopathy. And, some of those can be really dangerous. But, by and large, a lot of times narcissists bark louder than they bite. But I wouldn't necessarily say be complacent, because, you do want to be careful with these people. But the point is, how do you get rid of that fixation they have on you? Because as time passes and you just want to move on, you realize they haven't. And then it's kind of like, okay, I know who this person is. I know they're very unhealthy. I know they can never change. And frankly, these people tend to get worse in time. And I don't want them fixated on me. How do you get rid of it? Time usually does fix it, but it can take a lot longer than you would hope. Because what happens is, narcissists, they like to stay in their power. They don't like to be outside of their kind of personal power. And when they think of you and they think that you didn't really play the part that they need, on narcissists, they face this tension, because on the one hand, they want to use you and reel you in so that they can replay their story and ending on their terms. So they want to see you destroyed, ultimately. But on the other hand, the more they think about you and the more they think about how you kind of escape their grips, they feel powerless when they think about you. So, and that's what's so unnerving for narcissists when they think of people like you who got away, is because on the one hand, if they want to use you again to validate them so they can destroy you, that's something they really want to see that play out. But the more they think about it and they notice who you are today and that you've escaped their clutches, they don't really know how they can ever make that work. So they feel kind of powerless at the same time. And that disempowering feeling makes them feel very small, insecure, and just bad and drained. So what I think and what I would advise is just to, as time passes, don't feed them. Like, don't feed any hope. Don't go back. In time, they will start to get personally drained by the idea of you, because they will repeatedly feel powerless when they think about you, because they can never use you to validate them the way they want. And because they can't see through that solution, using you for their advantage, they can't see that through. They can't really see how that'll play itself out. In time, and this may be years even, they'll stop thinking about you. They'll let you go little by little until they can find someone else who they can use to validate them. But that in itself is a problem, because the narcissist looks at you and said, okay, you have certain attributes, you have certain qualities. If you're not willing to give yourself up for them, then somebody else of your caliber won't either. So somebody else who has comparable qualities and traits would probably react to them kind of like you do. So they wouldn't give them the time of day either, which basically means narcissists have to go to very low quality people and very low quality supply to have control over them and to feel empowered. But narcissists don't really like that, don't really like having to settle with the scraps at the bottom of the barrel. But that's the only way a narcissist can ever feel empowered, is if they do settle with the scraps at the bottom of the barrel. So that's another piece of tension that they face, is because if they want somebody in their life who is of high value and who supplies them properly, those people won't really entertain them unless they change who they are. But they don't change who they are. That's not an option, which then means they then have to kind of settle for scraps, which they don't like. So that's exactly why narcissists sometimes, they'll punch above their weight. They'll try to reel people in who are outside of their league. And then when they try to do that, and they might manage to get somebody's attention, they quickly realize that they can't use the person the way they so badly need. And that pretty much destroys them. And then they try to destroy the person, but then they can't, because the person doesn't really care about them. The person sees who they are. But at the same time, the person might feel a bit unnerved and creeped out just because of their excessive attention and, where that might lead to. But ultimately, you have to let them wear themselves out. Every time they think about you, they feel powerless. That's the bottom line. They feel possessive and obsessively think about you at times, yes, but they also feel powerless, which is a negative feeling, which drains them. And in time, they'll have no option but to go and settle for scraps.